She accepted $1 million for one night, but the CEO was willing to give everything for her love. Welcome to Mr. Carter Stories. Get ready for a world of intense romance, shocking twists and powerful emotions that will keep you hooked from start to finish. If you love billionaire drama, unexpected love stories, and heart-racing suspense, then you're in the right place. Don't just watch. Immerse yourself in the passion, the secrets, and the unforgettable moments. Drop a comment, hit the like button, and let us know your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Welcome to the world of Mr. Carter Stories, where love is never simple and every story is an obsession. Diamond, a life on the edge. Elena Dawson sat in the dimly lit cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, but hunger was the least of her worries. The past due bills on her phone screen blurred together as she tried to calculate the impossible. How to survive another month with no money, no options, and no hope. Her landlord's final notice was clear: pay up by the end of the week or get out. Her job as a waitress barely covered groceries, let alone rent. And then there was Noah. Her younger brother was all she had left. His illness was getting worse. The hospital bills stacked up like an insurmountable wall, and every rejection letter from medical aid programs felt like a fresh punch to the gut. The thought of failing him was unbearable. She let out a shaky breath and pushed her hair back, fighting the panic rising in her chest. She needed a miracle. And that was when the devil walked in. Unusual proposal. A man in a sleek black suit entered the cafe, standing out among the tired night workers and college students hunched over their laptops. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated wealth and power. His sharp eyes scanned the room before locking onto her. Elena Dawson. His deep voice sent a shiver down her spine. She hesitated. Who's asking? He pulled out a chair across from her, not waiting for an invitation. I work for Alexander Wolf. He would like to meet with you. The name alone sent a jolt of unease through her. Alexander Wolf was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, a billionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and cold, calculated demeanor. He wasn't the type to notice a struggling waitress. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. Why? The man slid a black envelope across the table. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart pounding as she unfolded the crisp paper inside. It was a contract, a one-night arrangement, $1 million. The air in her lungs vanished. Disgust, shock, desperation. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she reread the offer, hoping she had misunderstood, but the words were clear. One night. No strings. $1 million. Her stomach twisted in disgust. Is this a joke? The man remained emotionless. Mr. Wolf doesn't joke. She clenched her fists, her face burning with humiliation. Was this how low she had fallen? Was she so desperate that a man like Alexander Wolf thought he could buy her like an object? I'm not a prostitute, she snapped, shoving the contract back. I never said you were. The man's gaze was unreadable. Mr. Wolf simply finds you intriguing, she scoffed. I doubt that. His expression didn't change. I suggest you think it over. That kind of money could change your life. He slid a business card toward her. If you decide to accept, call this number by midnight. Then, without another word, he left. Elena stared at the contract and the card, her mind racing. $1 million, her brother's medical bills, a roof over their heads, a way out of this nightmare. But at what cost? The weight of a decision. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined Noah's frail body in the hospital bed, the doctors shaking their heads, the unpaid bills piling up. Was her pride worth more than her brother's life? She thought about Alexander Wolf. He was ruthless and untouchable, a man who could ruin lives with a flick of his wrist, but could he really be worse than the crushing weight of poverty? By 11:55 p.m., she was still staring at the phone. 5 minutes left. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Her thumb hovered over the number. A part of her screamed, "Don't do it!" But desperation is louder than dignity. She pressed call and sealed her fate. A life-changing reply. The phone barely rang once before a voice answered. "You've made the right choice, Miss Dawson." Her stomach dropped. "Mr. Wolf will send a car for you tomorrow night." The line went dead. Elena placed the phone down, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just sold one night of her life. But she had no idea that one night wouldn't be enough. Not for Alexander Wolf, and certainly not for her. A step into the unknown. Elena Dawson stood before the tall glass doors of Alexander Wolf's penthouse suite, her heart hammering against her ribs. The elevator ride had been smooth, yet every second had felt like a countdown to something irreversible. Dressed in an elegant yet simple black dress, chosen for her by a personal stylist she had never met, she felt like an imposter stepping into a world that was never meant for her. The city lights reflected off the towering windows, stretching endlessly beneath her, as if reminding her how far she had come, and how far she could still fall. She took a breath and stepped inside. The moment she did, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just the sheer luxury of the place, the marble floors, the curated artwork, the silent hum of wealth that filled the space. It was him. Alexander Wolf stood near the bar, his back to her, pouring a glass of deep red wine. His perfectly tailored black suit hugged his broad frame, and when he turned, his piercing grey eyes locked onto her like a predator studying its prey. "Miss Dawson." His voice was smooth, deep, unreadable. Eleanor swallowed. "Mr. Wolf." An unspoken tension. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The weight of their arrangement sat between them like an invisible barrier. One night, $1 million. Elena had expected coldness, indifference. She had prepared herself for it. But the way Alexander watched her, it wasn't just lust or control. It was something deeper, something unsettlingly intense. He stepped forward, his presence alone making the massive penthouse feel suffocatingly small. "Drink?" He held out a glass of wine. She hesitated before taking it. "Thank you." He watched as she brought the glass to her lips, his gaze lingering, not on her body, but on her. She shifted under the scrutiny. "Are you always this quiet?" A corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest ghost of a smirk. "Are you always this nervous?" She stiffened, setting her glass down. I don't do this, ever." "I know." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "That's why you intrigue me." The words sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. The breaking point. Alexander closed the distance between them, reaching out, not to pull her into his arms, but to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a jolt through her body. She should move, she should say something, but she was frozen beneath his gaze. "Elena," he murmured, her name rolling off his tongue like something forbidden. And that was it. The moment the last thread of restraint snapped, before she could second-guess herself, his mouth was on hers, fierce, demanding, consuming. There was no hesitation, no slow build-up. It was raw and urgent, a fire ignited from the very moment their eyes had met. His hands slid over her waist, pulling her flush against his body, and she melted into him, losing herself in the intoxicating push and pull of something far beyond a transaction. She had expected emptiness. She had expected to feel nothing. Instead, she felt everything. A man of secrets. The night unraveled in a blur of tangled sheets, whispered breaths, and a connection neither of them could explain. But it wasn't just the way he touched her. It was the way he looked at her afterward, his expression guarded yet almost vulnerable. Elena lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning. This was supposed to be simple, a means to an end. Then why did it feel like she had just opened a door that could never be closed again? She turned on her side, studying him in the dim light. His jaw was clenched, his mind clearly far away. "Alexander," she whispered, unsure why she even said his name. His gaze flickered to her, something undecipherable flashing in his silver eyes. "You should sleep." It was an order, a dismissal. But as he turned away, she caught something on his nightstand, a worn-out photograph tucked beneath his expensive watch. Elena reached for it before she could stop herself, and what she saw sent a chill through her veins. It was a picture of her, not from tonight, not from the past week, but from years ago. Elena gasped softly, her fingers tightening around the edges. What the hell was going on? Alexander snatched the photograph from her hands, his expression darkening. "Go to sleep, Elena." But she wasn't tired anymore, because this wasn't just a business deal. This was something far more dangerous, and she was about to find out exactly what. The morning after. The early morning light streamed through the massive glass windows of Alexander Wolf's penthouse, casting golden streaks across the room. The air was thick with silence, but Elena Dawson could still hear the echoes of last night. The whispered breaths, the burning touch, the way he looked at her, like she was something more than just a transaction. But that's all it was. A transaction. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the man beside her. Alexander lay on his side, his breathing steady, his expression unreadable even in sleep. Even now, he seemed controlled, as if he never let his guard down, except for last night. Elena's chest tightened. This is dangerous. She needed to leave. Her clothes lay scattered across the floor, a stark reminder of what had happened between them. Slipping out of bed, she moved as silently as possible, slipping into her dress and grabbing her purse. Her heart pounded as she reached for the door. No goodbye, no second thoughts. She needed to walk away and never look back. A cold goodbye. The elevator ride down felt endless. Her reflection in the mirrored walls showed a woman who should be relieved. A woman who had just secured a future for herself and her brother, $1 million. It would pay off her debts. It would cover Noah's hospital bills. It would change her life. So why did she feel like she was leaving something behind? As she stepped out of the sleek black skyscraper, the sharp morning air hit her like a slap. The city was already awake, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. She reached into her bag, fingers trembling as she pulled out the black envelope Alexander had given her last night. Inside was a check with too many zeros to comprehend. Her stomach twisted. This should feel like victory. It should feel like a lifeline, but all she felt was a hollowness she couldn't explain. Trying to forget. By the time she got home, the apartment felt even smaller than usual. The peeling wallpaper, the broken heater, it all reminded her of why she made this choice. She set the check down on the counter and sank onto the couch. This was the right thing to do. She had to forget him. Forget the way he touched her. Forget the way he looked at her like he was trying to figure her out. Forget the moment he whispered her name like it meant something. It was one night. That was the deal. But no matter how many times she told herself that, her body still remembered him. Her mind still replayed the way his lips felt against hers, and deep down, she knew Alexander Wolf wasn't the kind of man you just forgot. A message that changes everything. Elena spent the rest of the day trying to move on. She made calls to the hospital, scheduled Noah's next treatment, and even considered applying for a new job. But the moment her phone buzzed that night, her heart stopped. A message from him. One night wasn't enough. I need more. Elena's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around the phone, reading the words over and over. One night wasn't enough. She should ignore it. She should delete it and move on. But she couldn't. Her pulse pounded as she typed a response. Her fingers hesitating over the screen. She was playing with fire. But the real question was, did she want to burn? A surprising offer. It had been 2 days since Elena had received the message from Alexander Wolf. She hadn't responded immediately, thinking she could shake off the overwhelming feelings that had been clawing at her insides. But it was no use. No matter how many times she tried to distract herself, his words echoed in her mind. One night wasn't enough. I need more. She had told herself it was just a fleeting thought for him, a momentary lapse of control that meant nothing. But deep down, Elena knew it was something more. It wasn't just about the money. It was about him. The phone rang again the following day, and for a brief second she hesitated. She already knew who it was. The number on the screen was too familiar. Alexander. With a sigh, Elena picked up the phone. "Hello?" "Elena," came his deep, measured voice. "I think we need to talk." Her stomach churned. "What about us?" The word made her tense. "There is no us," she snapped, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He was silent for a moment, before speaking again, this time with an edge of calm assurance that unsettled her. "I want to make you an offer." She closed her eyes. She already knew what he was going to say. "You've had your night, Elena, but that wasn't enough. I need more time, more than just one night." Her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't understand why he wanted more, but the idea of spending more time with him after everything that had happened made her stomach twist. "I'm offering you a deal," he interrupted, his tone still unyielding. "1 month with me. No strings attached, no obligation. Just you and me. Whatever it is you need. If you refuse, the check will still be yours." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. A month with him. She had thought she knew Alexander Wolf, a man who played by his own rules, who had everything he wanted at his fingertips. But this offer was something else entirely. It was tempting, terrifying, and impossible. I won't." Her voice wavered. "You have to. You see, Eleanor, I don't just want you. I need you," he said quietly. "I can't explain why, but something tells me you're worth more than just one night. 1 month could give me the answers I'm searching for." Her pulse quickened. What was he talking about? Answers? Before she could say anything, he added, "I won't ask again, Elena. Think carefully. You don't have a lot of time." And with that, the line went dead. The fall. The decision should have been easy. She had $1 million. She had a chance at a fresh start. She was free. But fate had a different plan. The next day, Elena lost her job. Her boss, a man she had worked for years, gave her the news in a cold, clinical way. "We're cutting down hours. Your shifts are no longer available." She tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't budge. There was no chance for a second opinion. No amount of begging would change his mind. And so, she walked out of the diner for the last time, the loss of stability hitting her like a punch in the gut. She wasn't sure how she got home. She only knew she had to face the reality. The money from Alexander was all she had left. But it wasn't just the job she had lost. It was Noah's medical bills. The hospital called that morning to tell her the treatment he needed had increased in cost. The more they tried to help him, the more expensive his care became. She stood in the living room, her eyes blurry with tears, looking at the stack of bills on the counter. There was no way to pay them, no way to keep Noah alive without the treatment. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed. It was him again, Alexander. She took a deep breath and answered. "I'll do it," she said, her voice hollow. "I'll take your deal." The luxury and the unease. Within a few hours, a sleek black car arrived at her doorstep to take her to Alexander's world. She had packed her things, mostly necessities, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much bigger than herself. The moment she stepped inside the penthouse, she was hit by the overwhelming luxury that surrounded her. Every corner was immaculate, every piece of furniture chosen for its elegance. There were no traces of humanity, no sense of warmth. This place was like a carefully crafted chamber of ice, designed to isolate anyone who entered from the real world. Alexander was waiting for her in the living room, his back to her as he looked out over the city. He didn't turn when she entered, but she felt the weight of his gaze even before he spoke. "Welcome," he said, his voice low and measured. You'll have everything you need here." "Everything?" Elena repeated, unable to hide the suspicion in her tone. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to her, his eyes flashing with something unreadable. "Just don't forget why you're here. You'll find that I'm not interested in making your life harder, Elena. But I'm not here to waste time either." Elena nodded, trying to keep her composure, but something was off. She was surrounded by all the wealth she could ever need, but the restlessness in the air made her uneasy. Alexander wasn't just cold. He was watching her, studying her every move. There was a deep, intense focus in his eyes, as if he was trying to decipher something, as if he was searching for something in her, something that went beyond just the physical. "Why did you choose me?" she finally asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply looked at her, the shadows of something buried deep within him flickering in his gaze. "You'll understand in time," he said quietly. Eleanor wasn't sure she wanted to understand, but she knew one thing for certain. She was in too deep now, and the devil she had made a deal with had no intention of letting her go. The man behind the mask. The days in Alexander Wolf's world felt surreal. Luxury wrapped around Elena like a velvet cage, suffocating in its perfection. Expensive clothes were delivered to her. A private chef prepared meals she could barely pronounce. She was surrounded by wealth, yet she had never felt more out of place. And then there was him. During the day, Alexander was the man the world knew, the ruthless billionaire, commanding and unreadable. Their conversations were polite, controlled. He never overstepped, never made her feel like a prisoner, yet she felt the weight of his gaze constantly. He was watching her, studying her. But at night, when the world was quiet, he changed. Elena often found him in the living room, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He would stare out at the city, his reflection merging with the lights beyond. She never interrupted, but she noticed. She noticed how his shoulders tensed, how his fingers tightened around the glass, how his jaw clenched as if he was battling something inside him. And the more she watched, the more she realized Alexander Wolf was not the man the world thought he was. The scars. He hides. It was late, past midnight, when she found him there again. This time she didn't turn back. "You never sleep," she said softly. Alexander didn't move, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "Neither do you." She hesitated before stepping closer, the silence between them stretching. His profile was sharp, illuminated by the soft city lights, but there was something weary in the set of his features. "Do you ever stop?" she asked, watching him carefully. "Working, thinking, whatever it is you do when you stand here every night." His fingers flexed around his glass. "No." There was something in his tone, something unspoken. Elena exhaled. "You don't have to tell me, but I see it, you know. The way you close yourself off. The way you hold yourself like you're always expecting a fight." His eyes flickered toward her, a flash of silver in the dim light. "And what do you think you see, Elena?" She met his gaze, a man who's haunted by something. For the first time, his perfect mask cracked. Just for a second, his grip on the glass tightened and Elena caught it. A faint white scar running across his wrist, barely visible under the cuff of his expensive shirt. Before she could speak, he turned away. "Go to bed, Elena." But that night, she didn't sleep, because for the first time since she met him, she realized Alexander Wolf wasn't just a powerful man. He was a broken one. The photograph. The next evening, when Alexander left for a late business meeting, Elena found herself alone in the penthouse. She had told herself she wouldn't pry, that whatever demons he carried weren't hers to uncover. But curiosity was a dangerous thing. She wandered into his study, a place she had never entered before. The room smelled of leather and old books, lined with shelves filled with carefully arranged novels, business records, and files she dared not touch. And then she saw it, a photograph, tucked into the corner of his desk, half hidden beneath a folder. Elena's pulse quickened as she reached for it, carefully pulling it free. It was an old picture, worn, as if it had been handled too many times. A woman. She was beautiful, with dark, expressive eyes and a smile that looked both sad and full of love. Elena's breath hitched. Who was she? The air in the room shifted. "You shouldn't be in here." Elena spun around, the photograph still in her hands. Alexander stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, his icy grey eyes, were filled with something she had never seen before. Pain. She swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to say. I didn't mean to." "Put it down," he said quietly. She did, placing the photograph back where she'd found it. But the damage was done. Alexander stepped into the room, his movements slow, deliberate. "You have a habit of crossing lines, Elena." Her heart pounded. "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy. I just—" "You just what?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. "You think you can figure me out? That you can fix whatever it is you think is broken in me?" Her chest tightened. "That's not what this is." He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. "You don't know what you're asking, Elena. Some things are better left in the past." "But she meant something to you," she whispered. "Didn't she?" His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "She was my fiancée," he said, each word cutting through the air like a blade. Eleanor froze. She hadn't expected that. A fiancé, a love he lost. She didn't know what to say, how to respond. But before she could find the words, Alexander stepped forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. "I don't talk about her," he murmured, "and I don't want to. Not with you, not with anyone." She searched his face, trying to understand. "Why do you hide it?" His eyes darkened. "Because some ghosts aren't meant to be disturbed." The word sent a shiver down her spine. For the first time she realized that whatever haunted Alexander Wolf, It wasn't just heartbreak. It was something much, much worse. And she had just stepped too close to it, a name that changes everything. Elena couldn't shake the weight of Alexander's words. She was my fiancée. It had been days since she found the photograph in his study, but the memory of his expression, that flicker of pain, of something raw and unguarded, stayed with her. Now she had a name. Sophia. It haunted her. Who was she? How had she left a scar so deep on a man like Alexander Wolf, who seemed untouchable, invincible? More importantly, was Elena just standing in her shadow? The story of Sophia. Elena didn't expect him to talk about it, but he did. One evening after a tense, silent dinner, she found him once again by the window, staring out at the city. His glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table beside him. She hesitated before stepping closer. "Tell me about her." His back remained to her. "What makes you think I want to?" "You don't," she said quietly, "but I think you need to." Silence. Then finally, a sigh. "You already know her name," Alexander said, his voice calm but distant. "Sophia." Elena waited, heart pounding. "We met when I was 25, he continued. She was brilliant, a lawyer, fierce, beautiful. She made me believe that love—" He cut himself off, shaking his head. "That it could be real." Elena swallowed. "What happened?" His grip tightened on the edge of the window frame. "She betrayed me." The words were bitter, laced with something deeper than anger. "How?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander turned, and for the first time she saw it, the ghost of the past still burning in his eyes. "She wasn't just my fiancée. She was my weakness, and she used it against me." He moved toward the bar, pouring himself a drink. "She was working with my biggest competitor, leaking information, business deals, things that almost cost me everything." Elena's stomach twisted. She spied on you?" "She sold me out." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "For money, for power, maybe even for love. Someone else's, not mine." Elena's breath caught. "You think she never loved you?" Alexander exhaled sharply, downing his drink. "I don't believe in love, Elena." Something inside her cracked. Of course he didn't. Not after that, not after believing in someone, trusting them, only to have them rip his world apart. "Am I just a pawn?" A heavy silence filled the room. Then softly, Elena asked the question she had been too afraid to voice. "And me? What am I to you, Alexander?" His jaw tightened. "Why are you asking?" "Because I need to know." Her heart pounded. "Am I just a distraction? A replacement for the woman who destroyed you?" His eyes darkened. "No." "Then what am I?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. "You're the first woman I've wanted in years," he admitted. "The first I haven't been able to forget." Elena's breath hitched. "That doesn't mean I matter." He reached for her, his fingers brushing against her jaw. "Doesn't it?" She wanted to believe him, wanted to think she was something more. But the ghost of Sophia still lingered between them. Was he drawn to her because of who she was, or because of who she wasn't? And worse, was she falling for a man who would never be able to love her back? The line between real and pretend. That night, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, questions racing through her mind. She had agreed to 1 month, no strings, no expectations, but what if she had already broken the rules? What if, somewhere between resisting Alexander Wolf and uncovering his past, she had already given him her heart? And what if he would never be able to give his in return? One thing was clear. If she wasn't careful, this wouldn't just end in heartbreak, it would destroy her. The Island of Secrets. Elena had seen luxury. She had spent weeks in Alexander Wolf's world, private chefs, high-end fashion, penthouse views that stretched beyond the horizon. But nothing compared to this. The island was breathtaking. Crystal blue waters surrounded them, waves lapping gently against white sands. The air smelled of salt and something untouched, as if the world outside didn't exist here. The villa, his villa, was a masterpiece, a secluded haven carved into the cliffs with open terraces that overlooked the ocean. "You own this?" she asked, stepping off the private jet, the heat of the sun kissing her skin. Alexander adjusted his sunglasses, his expression unreadable. "I don't bring people here." Elena turned to him, her heartbeat faltering. "Then why me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took her hand and led her toward the waiting boat. The shift between them. Elena had been prepared for another cold, transactional trip. Maybe he needed an escape from the city, from his life. Maybe she was just a distraction, a convenient companion. But that's not what this was. It started small. A laugh when she tripped in the sand and he caught her, his rare, deep chuckle vibrating against her skin. A look during dinner, when the sunset bathed them in gold, and he watched her instead of eating, as if memorizing her. A touch when she fell asleep in the hammock, and she woke to find him draping a blanket over her, his fingers lingering just a second too long. Here, Alexander was different, less guarded, more real. And it terrified her, the night that changed everything. It was late when Elena found him on the beach, barefoot, staring out at the waves. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, making him look almost vulnerable. "You okay?" she asked softly. He didn't turn, but his voice was quieter than usual. "This place used to feel like peace." Elena stepped closer, wrapping her arms around herself, and now it feels like a reminder. She hesitated. Of what? He exhaled. "That no matter how far I run, some things don't leave me." A beat of silence. Then, before she could stop herself, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. He stiffened but didn't pull away. "I'm not her," she whispered. Alexander finally turned to face her, his grey eyes unreadable. "I know," she swallowed. "Then why do you keep acting like I'm a mistake?" His jaw tightened. "Because if I don't, I might not be able to let you go." The word sent a shiver down her spine. She had known this was temporary. She had told herself not to feel more than she should. But what if, deep down, he felt it too, pushing her away? The next morning, everything changed. Alexander was cold again, distant. Elena woke up alone, his side of the bed untouched. At breakfast, he barely looked at her. By afternoon, he had disappeared into his office, locked away behind walls she thought he had started to lower. By dinner, she couldn't take it anymore. "Did I do something?" she asked, standing in his doorway. Alexander didn't look up from his desk. "No." "Then why are you acting like last night didn't happen?" His fingers curled into a fist on the table. "Because it didn't." Elena's heart cracked. "You're lying." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Elena, no!" she snapped. "I'm not stupid, Alexander. I know what I felt, what we both felt. And you can pretend all you want, but I'm not going to stand here and let you act like it meant nothing." Finally, he met her gaze, something dark and stormy in his expression. "It has to mean nothing." Her chest ached. "Why?" "Because if it means something," his voice was rough, almost broken, "then I have something to lose." The confession sent a sharp pain through her. He was scared, not of her, not of desire, but of what came after, of love, of trusting someone again. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "Not unless you push me away." For a moment, something flickered in his gaze. Longing, uncertainty. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "This isn't real, Elena," he said quietly. "It never was." And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, heart in her hands, realizing that maybe she had made a terrible mistake. A whispered warning. Elena had almost convinced herself that what happened on the island meant something. Even after Alexander pulled away, after he tried to pretend that what they shared was just part of their deal, she could still feel it, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way his fingers lingered just a second too long when they touched. It wasn't nothing. At least, that's what she believed, until the truth shattered everything. It started with a phone call. She wasn't supposed to hear it. She had only been passing by his office when she heard her name, and then Sophia's name. She froze. "She doesn't know," Alexander's voice was low, tight, "and she never will." A pause, then a laugh. Not his. "You really think you can hide this forever?" A man's voice mocked. "She's going to find out, Wolf, and when she does, you'll lose her, just like you lost Sophia." Elena's blood turned to ice. Lost Sophia? Her pulse thundered as she stepped closer, her heart screaming at her to turn away, to pretend she hadn't heard, but she couldn't. "Stay out of this." Alexander's voice was sharp now, dangerous. "This isn't your game to play." "Oh, but it was never your game either, was it?" the man sneered. "You were just a pawn in this from the beginning, and so is she." The call ended. The silence that followed felt deafening. Elena didn't wait. She pushed the door open, her chest tight with something between panic and fury. "Who was that?" she demanded. Alexander's head snapped up, his expression instantly unreadable. "Elena." "Don't," she cut him off. "Don't lie to me. Who was that?" His lips parted, but no words came out, and that silence and that hesitation was enough. She had been right to be afraid. The truth that cut deeper than a knife. "You knew me before we met, didn't you?" she whispered. Alexander's jaw clenched. "Eleanor, stop saying my name like that," she snapped, her voice breaking. "Tell me the truth." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Yes." The world tilted. Her breath came fast and sharp. "What do you mean, yes?" His eyes darkened. "I knew who you were before the night we met." She felt sick, her stomach twisted, her hands trembling at her sides. "But why?" The word barely escaped her lips. Alexander exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Because someone wanted me to find you." Her heart nearly stopped. "Who?" The moment stretched. Then finally he said it. "Sophia's father." Elena stumbled back like she had been physically hit. "Sophia's." She shook her head, unable to process it. "Why? What does he have to do with this? With me?" Alexander's gaze was haunted. "Because he thinks you have something that belongs to him." She swallowed hard. "That's insane." "He doesn't care," Alexander said quietly. "He believes your family, your brother, had something to do with what happened to Sophia. He's been looking for a way to get to you for years." Eleanor's legs felt weak. Her brother? This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to deny everything. But deep down, in the darkest part of her mind, something clicked. The strange phone calls, the way her brother always refused to talk about the past, the feeling that someone had been watching her, following her, waiting. And now, it all led here, to Alexander, to the man she had started to trust, and to the truth that ripped that trust apart. Was it all a lie? How long? Her voice was barely a whisper. Alexander's face was unreadable. "Elena, how long?" she screamed. A long, heavy silence. Then, "Before we met." Something inside her shattered. "From the very beginning," she whispered. He didn't deny it. She let out a shaky breath, nausea rolling through her. "So everything between us, it wasn't real." Alexander stepped forward, his expression pained. "That's not what this was." "Then what was it?" Her voice cracked. "Was I just a way to ease your guilt? A way to clean up whatever mess Sophia's father made?" His eyes darkened. It was never like that, but she couldn't believe him. She wouldn't. "Everything I felt for you," she whispered, more to herself than him. "Everything I thought we had, it was all based on a lie." "Elena." He reached for her, but she stepped back. The pain in his gaze was unmistakable, and that hurt more than anything, because for the first time she saw it, not just regret, not just guilt, but fear of losing her. But it was too late. "You should have told me," she said, her voice hollow. And then, before he could stop her, she walked away, running from the past. Elena had spent her entire life running from debt, running from heartbreak, and now running from him. Days passed, then a week. She left the city, finding refuge in a small coastal town far from the chaos of Alexander's world. She needed to breathe, to think, to figure out who she was without him. But no matter how far she went, the pain followed. She had thought she could forget him. But how do you forget the way someone's touch made you feel safe? How do you erase the way they looked at you, like you were the only thing that mattered? She couldn't, and worse, she wasn't alone. The man, she thought she escaped it, started with a shadow, a flicker of movement outside her window, a familiar feeling, the kind that made her stomach twist in dread. Then, the phone calls. She never answered, but the silence on the other end sent chills down her spine. And then, the note slipped under her door. "You can't run forever, Elena." She sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers trembling as she crushed the paper in her hand. She knew that handwriting, Liam. Her past had finally caught up with her. The man she thought she had escaped, the man who had once sworn he would find her no matter how far she ran. And now he had. The moment he returns. She should have left immediately, packed her things and disappeared before he could reach her. But it was too late. A knock at the door made her blood run cold. Her heart pounded as she stepped back, her mind screaming at her to run, hide, do anything but open that door. But before she could move, the door flew open, and it wasn't Liam standing there. It was Alexander, drenched from the storm raging outside, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His eyes were wild, furious. "You think I'd let you go that easily," he growled. The breath she had been holding escaped in a sharp exhale. "How did you find me?" she whispered. He took a step inside, towering over her, his presence consuming the entire room. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" Her heart clenched. She didn't know what to say. He ran a hand through his soaked hair, his jaw tight. "Damn it, Elena. Do you have any idea what it's been like not knowing where you were, not knowing if you were safe?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay strong. "I left for a reason, Alexander." His expression darkened. "And I should have followed sooner." She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "Number, you should have let me go." A dangerous confession. Alexander exhaled sharply, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head to look at him. "You can hate me," he said, his voice rough. "You can blame me, but you don't get to stand there and tell me to let you go when I know damn well you don't want that." Her breath hitched. "Tell me I mean nothing to you," he challenged. "Look me in the eyes and say it, and I'll walk away." Elena opened her mouth, but nothing came out because she couldn't say it, not when every part of her still ached for him. His gaze softened just slightly. "That's what I thought." She let out a shaky breath. "That doesn't change what you did." "I know," he admitted, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that what we had, what we have, is real." A single tear escaped down her cheek. "Alexander." He stepped closer, reaching for her, but before he could touch her, the sound of shattering glass cut through the air. A rock had smashed through the window, and when Eleanor turned toward the sound, she saw him, Liam, standing in the rain, his dark eyes locked on her, a cruel smirk on his face. "I told you," he called out, "Okay, you can't run forever, sweetheart." A love worth fighting for everything happened at once. Alexander's entire body tensed with lethal rage. "Who the hell is he?" Elena's throat went dry. "He's my past." Liam tilted his head. "That's not very nice after everything we've been through." Alexander took a step forward, his fists clenched. "If you take one more step toward her, I'll end you." Liam chuckled. "I'd love to see you try, billionaire." Elena grabbed Alexander's arm before he could move. "Number, he's dangerous." Alexander's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring. "So am I." She had never seen him like this raw, this unhinged. And for the first time she realized something. This wasn't just about possessiveness. It wasn't about winning. He loved her. She saw it in his eyes, in the way his entire body radiated fury at the thought of someone hurting her. He was willing to fight for her. The question was she ready to let him? As Liam took another step forward, a cruel promise in his eyes, Elena finally knew the answer. She turned to Alexander, her fingers tightening around his. "Then let's fight!" And as the storm raged outside, so did the war for her future, one she refused to lose. A love that refuses to be silent. The media had a field day with the story. Alexander Wolf, the ruthless billionaire, the man who never let emotions dictate his actions, had lost control. Not in the boardroom, not in a scandalous business deal, but over a woman, over her. Elena watched from the shadows of the grand ballroom as the whispers spread like wildfire. Tonight was supposed to be about his company's biggest merger yet, a deal worth billions, but instead all anyone could talk about was the press conference that stopped the world. Because Alexander had done something unthinkable. He had stood before the cameras in front of his investors, his employees, the world, and said the words no one expected from him. "I love her." The room had gone silent. He didn't stop. She wasn't a deal. She wasn't a mistake. And she sure as hell wasn't just one night. Gasps echoed. Cameras flashed. His business partners had gaped in horror. But Alexander hadn't cared. "I built an empire by making the right decisions, by never taking risks unless I knew the outcome." He had looked straight into the lens, his voice unwavering. "But then she walked into my life, and suddenly I didn't care about control anymore. I didn't care about winning." A sharp breath, a long pause. "I just cared about her." Elena's chest tightened. She had tried to walk away, had told herself that she couldn't trust him, that she couldn't risk her heart again. But now, she stood here, watching him lay everything bare for the world, and she felt everything, willing to lose it all. As the night went on, Alexander was nowhere to be found at the celebration that was supposed to be for him, because he didn't care about it. He cared about one thing: her. Elena found him on the rooftop of the building, away from the flashing cameras and business tycoon, still reeling from his declaration. He was leaning against the railing, staring at the city lights below, waiting for her. "You just destroyed your reputation," she whispered as she approached. He turned, his gaze dark and unreadable. "Worth it," she swallowed hard. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said simply. "I did." Eleanor's heart pounded. "You walked away from the biggest deal of your career." "I would walk away from everything if it meant keeping you." The weight of his words hit like a storm. She shook her head, the emotions rising too fast, too strong. "You don't get it, Alexander. It's not just about words. It's about trust. And I know," he interrupted softly. Then, to her shock, he pulled something out of his pocket. A legal document. She frowned. "What is that?" He handed it to her. Her entire world tilted. It was a contract, his own resignation. She jerked her gaze back to him. "This is my way of proving that I don't care about the money, the power, the control," he said quietly. "If I have to walk away from my company to prove that I love you, not because of some deal, not because of anything other than the fact that I can't breathe without you, I'll do it." Tears burned behind her eyes. "You're crazy," she whispered. He smirked. "For you?" "Absolutely." Her heart cracked wide open, the answer that changed everything. She stared at him, this impossible, stubborn, beautiful man who had once terrified her, who had once been nothing but a name on a contract. And yet, here he was, ready to risk everything for her. "Say the word, Elena," he murmured, stepping closer. "Say the word, and I'll sign it. I'll walk away from all of it. I'll start over, because none of it matters if you're not in it with me." A sob caught in her throat. This wasn't about money. It had never been about money. She had been terrified to trust, terrified to believe, but love was a risk, and sometimes the greatest risks led to the most extraordinary rewards. Elena looked into his eyes, her heart pounding, and she knew she was never meant to be his for just one night. She was meant to be his forever. With a shaky breath, she took the contract from his hands and tore it in half. Alexander froze. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "I don't need you to prove anything." His chest rose sharply. "I just need you," she said. A beat. Then he kissed her, and for the first time in her life, Elena wasn't running anymore. She was home,